Hey everyone, and welcome back. This is part 2 of our exploration of the biggest lies told about Africa and Africans throughout history. In part 1, we examined 4 foundational myths: the lie that Africa has no history, the curse of Ham and Hamitic hypothesis, the dark continent myth, and the fiction of Africa as a single entity. Those lies provided the intellectual framework that made centuries of exploitation possible. Today, we're examining how these foundational lies translated into action, into specific systems of exploitation and control. We'll look at 3 more major lies: that colonialism was benevolent, that Africa is perpetually dependent and dysfunctional, and the erasure of African intellectual achievements. Then we'll dig deeper into who continues to benefit from these lies today, and what confronting them honestly means. Let's dive back in. Number 5. The benevolent colonialism myth. Let's address one of the most dangerous persistent lies: that colonialism, whatever its flaws, ultimately benefited African peoples by bringing development, infrastructure, education, and the rule of law. This lie is particularly insidious because it contains just enough factual elements to seem plausible. Yes, colonial powers built some roads and railways, but the question is, who were these built for and who benefited? Let's be clear about what colonialism actually was. It was the violent conquest and subjugation of most of Africa by European powers for explicit resource extraction and strategic advantage. The infrastructure built wasn't to benefit Africans or develop African economies. It was to facilitate efficient removal of resources from interior to ports for shipment to Europe. Belgian historian John Stengers, examining colonial archives, found administrators were remarkably explicit in private documents. The stated goal wasn't African development. It was making colonies profitable for the colonizing nation. Roads and railways led from mines and plantations directly to ports. They didn't connect African communities in ways that would facilitate internal trade or development. Schools, when they existed, were designed to train low-level clerks and administrators who could help maintain colonial rule. And let's talk about what colonialism destroyed. It destroyed existing political structures. The Kingdom of Benin had complex governmental structures, sophisticated artistic traditions, and functioning legal systems. British forces invaded in 1897, burned the capital, killed thousands, and looted thousands of bronze sculptures. Most still sit in British museums today. Colonialism destroyed economic systems, forcing subsistence farmers into cash crop production for export. Farmers were required to dedicate portions of their land to crops like cotton, coffee, or rubber, reducing their ability to grow food and making them dependent on wage labor. This wasn't development. It was deliberate restructuring of economies to serve colonial interests. It drew arbitrary borders cutting across ethnic and political units. The Berlin Conference saw European powers literally drawing lines on maps with no African input. Nigeria encompasses over 250 ethnic groups forced into a single unit. The violence was extraordinary. In Congo Free State under Leopold II, rubber extraction relied on forced labor enforced through systematic terror. Villages that didn't meet quotas saw inhabitants killed or mutilated. The population declined by millions. This happened while Leopold presented himself as a humanitarian. Forced labor was routine across colonial Africa. Taxation systems were designed to force people into wage labor in colonial enterprises. Resistance was met with brutal repression. The Herero and Namakwa genocide in German Southwest Africa saw systematic extermination of peoples resisting colonization. And here's the cynical part. The supposed civilizing mission was used throughout the colonial period to justify continuing colonial rule. Any problems were blamed on Africans not being ready for self-governance rather than on colonialism's extractive nature. Colonial administrators pointed to poverty they'd created and said, "See? They need our guidance." When independence came in the 1960s and 1970s, won through decades of struggle, colonial powers didn't leave behind developed nations. They left artificially constructed states, economies oriented toward extraction, and often ongoing economic dependency through debt and unfavorable trade relationships. Contemporary challenges many African nations face aren't despite colonialism, they're because of it. Number 6. Africa as perpetually dependent and dysfunctional. Closely tied to these myths is the persistent characterization of Africa as perpetually dependent, incapable of self-governance, constantly in crisis, requiring outside intervention. This myth justifies outside interference, absolves former colonial powers of responsibility, and erases African agency. Yes, many African countries face significant poverty. But here's what doesn't get mentioned. That percentage is falling significantly. 6 of the world's 10 fastest-growing economies recently have been African. A growing middle class is emerging. 1 in 3 Africans are now middle class. But the narrative of perpetual dysfunction serves Western interests. It justifies aid programs requiring recipient countries to adopt policies favoring donor nations, structural adjustment programs requiring cuts to health care and education spending, privatization of state enterprises, and removal of trade protections. These policies often benefit Western corporations more than African populations. It provides cover for continued exploitation. When a continent is portrayed as fundamentally dysfunctional, ongoing resource extraction at low prices can be framed as natural market forces rather than continuation of colonial-era relationships. The failed state narrative is particularly pernicious. Yes, some African countries have experienced state collapse, but these are portrayed as evidence of inherent African inability rather than consequences of specific circumstances, many tied to colonial legacies and ongoing interference. Consider the factors contributing to state fragility. Borders deliberately cut across ethnic boundaries. Nigeria encompasses over 250 groups, with different languages and religions forced together. Economic systems-oriented economies toward extraction. Colonial powers played ethnic groups against each other, and departing colonial powers often actively destabilized new states. The assassination of Patrice Lumumba in Congo occurred with CIA involvement, as declassified documents confirm. Lumumba was killed because he resisted Western corporate control of Congo's mineral wealth. The destabilization that followed, decades of dictatorship under Mobutu, then devastating civil wars, traces directly to this interference. Or consider France's continuing control over former colonies. 14 African countries use the CFA franc, controlled by the French treasury, not by African countries themselves. France has intervened militarily in former colonies over 50 times since decolonization. French companies maintain dominant positions in key sectors. This isn't African failure. It's ongoing neo-colonial control preventing genuine independence. The Rwanda genocide is often portrayed as ancient tribal hatreds, as if Africans are naturally prone to ethnic conflict. But Belgian administrators actively created and hardened divisions between Hutus and Tutsis using the Hamitic hypothesis, issued identity cards listing ethnicity, and systematically favored Tutsis. The genocide was the culmination of tensions deliberately manufactured by colonial policies. Now, African leaders do bear responsibility for contemporary problems. Corruption exists, poor decisions have been made, authoritarianism has flourished. But starting conditions matter enormously. When you inherit artificially constructed states, economies designed for extraction, massive inequality, and ongoing interference, governing effectively becomes extraordinarily difficult. Yet despite this, there are remarkable success stories. Botswana has had stable democratic governance since 1966 and successfully leveraged diamond resources for development. Rwanda has achieved impressive growth and stability. Ghana has established functioning democracy with peaceful transfers of power. Mauritius has developed a diversified economy. The technological innovation happening across Africa is extraordinary. Mobile phone penetration has transformed commerce and banking. Kenya leads globally in mobile banking. M-Pesa pioneered approaches now studied worldwide. Entrepreneurs are developing solutions to local challenges: solar power systems, agricultural apps, healthcare innovations. This demonstrates that when Africans have resources and opportunity, they innovate at world-class levels. None of this fits the narrative of perpetual dysfunction. Understanding this complexity is crucial. Africa's story is one of extraordinary resilience and achievement, despite challenges deliberately created and maintained. Number 7. The erasure of African intellectual and technical achievement. Finally, the idea that African peoples made no significant contributions to human knowledge, technology, or civilization. This erasure dehumanizes Africans and positions Europeans as soul-bearers of progress. Let's start with the fundamental point. Africa is where humanity began. Anatomically modern humans emerged in Africa around 300,000 years ago. The earliest evidence of human culture, tool use, language, symbolic thought, art, all comes from Africa. Every human is descended from African ancestors. This is established scientific consensus. The earliest stone tools date back over 3 million years from East Africa. The oldest known art, ochre engravings from South Africa, dates back 73,000 years. The Ishango bone from the Congo, dating to 20,000 years ago, shows mathematical tally marks possibly representing early mathematical thinking or a lunar calendar. But the erasure extends to denying sophisticated achievements throughout history. Ancient Egypt developed hieroglyphic writing around 3,200 BCE, made advances in mathematics and astronomy, built architectural marvels like the pyramids, created a bureaucratic state lasting 3 millennia, and developed sophisticated medical practices. Egypt is in Africa, built by Africans. The Kingdom of Kush developed its own writing system and ruled Egypt as the 25th dynasty. Great Zimbabwe was a massive stone complex demonstrating advanced architectural knowledge. Yet European colonizers insisted it must have been built by outsiders because they couldn't accept that black Africans created such structures. African metallurgy was often more advanced than European metallurgy in comparable periods. Ironworking developed in sub-Saharan Africa independently. African blacksmiths produced high-carbon steel using techniques Europeans wouldn't match until the Industrial Revolution. African agricultural innovations are underappreciated. Africans independently domesticated African rice, various yams, coffee, watermelon, sorghum, millet. They developed sophisticated techniques adapted to diverse environments. The University of Sankore in Timbuktu was a major learning center from the 12th century onward, with thousands of students studying astronomy, mathematics, medicine, literature. The manuscripts preserved there demonstrate sophisticated intellectual traditions. Africa developed multiple indigenous writing systems. Beyond Egyptian hieroglyphics, there was Ge'ez in Ethiopia, the Vai script in Liberia, the Bamum script in Cameroon, and contributions continue today. From mobile banking innovations to technological solutions addressing local challenges to contributions of African researchers across fields, all demonstrate ongoing African contribution to human knowledge. The erasure of these contributions isn't accidental. Acknowledging that Africans built impressive civilizations makes it much harder to justify treating them as inferiors needing conquest and rule. In Part 1, we identified historical beneficiaries, slave traders, colonial powers, white populations through racial hierarchies. But we need to examine how these benefits persist in new forms, because understanding ongoing benefit helps explain why these lies continue. Multinational corporations continue benefiting from extractive relationships established during colonialism. Mining companies extract minerals while paying minimal taxes through legal loopholes and transfer pricing schemes. They employ relatively few local workers at low wages, provide minimal local development, and ship raw materials elsewhere to create value and jobs in other countries. Agricultural corporations establish large plantations or contract farming arrangements that displace small farmers and concentrate profits. Pharmaceutical companies enforce patent regimes, preventing African countries from manufacturing affordable generic medicines their populations desperately need. All of this exploitation is facilitated by narratives positioning Africans as incapable of managing their own resources. International financial institutions and the development industry benefit from the aid system. Billions of dollars flow through NGOs, international organizations, and development agencies each year, with significant portions going toward salaries of foreign experts, administration costs, consultants, and programs designed by outsiders rather than by African communities. While many individuals working in development are genuinely committed to helping, the structure of the aid industry often reinforces dependency rather than building genuine capacity. The system can create incentives for African governments to present their countries as helpless and crisis-ridden to attract funding. Western governments benefit from maintaining influence in former colonies. Military bases in African countries provide strategic positioning for projecting power. Economic relationships ensure access to critical resources: oil from Nigeria and Angola, minerals from the Congo, agricultural products from across the continent. Political influence serves broader geopolitical interests in competitions with other powers. All of this is easier to justify and maintain when the prevailing narrative suggests these countries are dysfunctional and incapable of managing their own affairs without outside guidance. And the lies benefit wealthy nations broadly by maintaining global economic structures that systematically favor developed countries over developing ones, unfavorable terms of trade where commodity prices remain low while manufactured goods remain expensive, debt obligations that consume massive portions of government budgets, international trade and investment rules largely written by and for powerful nations, intellectual property regimes that protect Western corporate interests while limiting access to medicines and technologies that could save lives and accelerate development. So what does confronting these lies honestly mean in practical terms? What can we actually do? It starts with the personal work of examining narratives we've internalized about Africa and actively seeking out African voices and perspectives rather than relying on Western intermediaries to explain Africa to us. It means recognizing that Africa's 54 countries have distinct histories, challenges, and achievements, and rejecting the monolithic Africa framing that erases diversity. When you hear someone make sweeping claims about Africa or Africans, push back and ask which country or region they're actually talking about. It means being deeply skeptical of narratives that position Africa as perpetually needing saving or intervention from outside. Instead, we should be asking, what are Africans themselves saying about their situations? What solutions are they proposing? How can we support African-led development rather than imposing outside solutions? It means acknowledging the enormous contributions Africa and Africans have made to human civilization, from being humanity's birthplace to sophisticated ancient civilizations to contemporary innovations. When African achievement gets erased or minimized in education or media, we need to speak up and provide the missing context. It means recognizing that these lies weren't just damaging to Africans. They were and are part of larger systems of racial oppression affecting people of African descent everywhere in the world. The work of dismantling these myths is inseparable from confronting racism in all its forms. Concretely, it means supporting reparations for slavery and colonialism, not just financial reparations, though those matter enormously, but also returning stolen artifacts to African museums and communities, restructuring international economic systems to be more equitable, and honestly acknowledging historical wrongs in education and public discourse. It means challenging corporations operating in Africa and demanding they pay fair taxes, provide decent wages, and contribute to genuine development rather than just extraction. It means questioning aid programs that come with strings attached and supporting truly African-led development initiatives. It means being willing to have uncomfortable conversations about history, complicity, and ongoing injustice with friends, family, colleagues. It means examining and being willing to change the ways our own societies, our own economies, our own comfortable lifestyles benefit from historical and ongoing exploitation of Africa. It means changing how we consume and share media about Africa, being critical of coverage that reinforces stereotypes, actively seeking out and amplifying African voices and perspectives, supporting African journalists, filmmakers, writers, and artists who are telling complex, nuanced stories about the continent. It means educating ourselves and others about real African history, not the sanitized, distorted versions often taught in schools, but the complex, rich, often painful real history. It means teaching our children different stories about Africa and the world. The work is happening right now. African historians are recovering erased histories. African activists are challenging ongoing injustices. African artists are creating work that centers African perspectives and experiences. African entrepreneurs and innovators are solving problems and building futures. The question is whether those of us who aren't African whether we're in Europe, North America, or elsewhere, will join that work, support it, and do our part to dismantle the systems and beliefs that these lies created and continue to maintain. The lies we've examined, that Africa has no history, that Africans are cursed, that the continent is dark and savage, that Africa is homogeneous, that colonialism was benevolent, that Africans are incapable of self-governance, that they've made no contributions, weren't innocent mistakes. They were strategic fabrications serving specific interests. These lies justified atrocities, facilitated exploitation, and created hierarchies that persist. They continue affecting how Africa is perceived, how resources are distributed, how power operates globally. But lies are inherently fragile. They require constant maintenance because they contradict reality. The truth is powerful precisely because it corresponds to reality. And reality has a way of asserting itself when people are willing to look honestly. The work of countering these lies is essential and ongoing. It requires all of us, questioning what we think we know, seeking out truth, pushing back against injustice, and working toward more just systems. The lies about Africa shaped our world, but they are still lies. The question is whether we're willing to confront that truth and do the difficult work of building something better. Thanks for sticking with me through both parts. I know it's been heavy, but it's important. What have you learned that challenged what you were taught? How do you see these lies manifesting today? What steps seem most important? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.